Abandoned after her arrest, a German Shepherd K9 stayed behind at a broken gas station everyone in town said was worthless. For 5 long years, he waited, not for food, not for shelter, but for the woman who had been taken away in handcuffs for a crime she never committed. The station sat alone on the edge of Red Hollow, its pumps rusted, its windows dark, its sign hanging crooked in the desert wind. Most people forgot it existed, but the dog didn't. Every evening he lay beneath the same faded awning, eyes fixed on the highway, listening for a bus that never came. At 6:12 a.m., just as the Arizona sky began to turn from gray to soft orange, a greyhound finally slowed at the edge of town. One woman stepped down. Emily Harper carried everything she owned in 2 worn bags, 1 change of clothes, $67 in cash, and 5 years of silence no one ever apologized for. She didn't see the dog at first, but he recognized her instantly, because loyalty doesn't forget, and some hearts wait longer than justice. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if you still believe loyalty, truth, and kindness matter. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. The gas station, with only one soul, left. The desert around Red Hollow, Arizona woke slowly that morning. A pale wind drifted across the open land, carrying fine dust from the flats and brushing against the low buildings at the edge of town. The sky was already bright, but the heat had not yet settled in. It was the kind of early silence that made even abandoned places feel like they were holding their breath. 5 miles outside the town limits, just past where the asphalt cracked and thinned into a forgotten stretch of highway, stood Hollow Creek Gas and Diner. It had been closed for 5 years. The pumps were rusted to the color of dried blood. The diner windows were clouded with grime and sun-bleached posters from another decade. The hand-painted sign Hollow Creek, family-owned since 1978, hung crooked from one remaining chain, creaking softly whenever the wind passed through. No cars stopped there anymore. No people either, except for one. Everyone in Red Hollow knew the story, even if no one ever told it the same way. "There's a dog out there," people said. "A big German Shepherd. Hasn't left since the place shut down. Won't go with anyone. Just waits." They said it the way people talked about a ghost. Something strange, something sad, something best left alone. Under the faded metal awning, where the shadow stayed longest during the day, Rex lay on the concrete. He was an elderly male German Shepherd, once massive, now softened by age. His frame was still large and powerful, the build of a working K9 shaped by years of training and duty. But time had dulled the edges. His coat was the classic black and tan, thick but uneven, with heavy gray spreading around his muzzle, eyebrows, and chest. One ear stood upright, the other leaned slightly, the cartilage weakened from an old injury. His eyes were amber deep, intelligent, steady. They were not the eyes of a stray. They were the eyes of a dog who had belonged somewhere. Rex wore no harness now, only a worn leather collar, cracked with age, bearing faint impressions where a metal K9 tag had once hung. His back leg dragged just a little when he stood, the result of damage he never fully recovered from. He slept lightly, always lightly, because every afternoon, without fail, Rex lifted his head and turned toward the highway. The highway ran straight and flat through the desert, cutting Red Hollow from the rest of the world. Trucks passed through without slowing. Tourists never stopped. The gas station didn't even appear on most digital maps anymore. But Rex remembered when it had mattered. He remembered the sound of tires pulling in, the smell of fuel, the chime of the diner door, the familiar footsteps that always came last. He remembered her. The waiting was not dramatic. Rex did not whine or howl. He did not pace or scratch at doors. He simply watched, day after day, evening after evening, as if patience itself were a duty he had never been released from. Once a day, usually near sunset, a boy on a bicycle passed by. His name was Caleb Moore, though Rex did not know names. Caleb was 12 years old, thin, all elbows and knees, with sunburned skin and hair that never seemed to lie flat. He delivered newspapers before school, riding routes his father had once ridden before him. Caleb stopped a few yards away from the gas station every afternoon. He never came too close. The first time he had tried, Rex had stood slowly, his posture calm but unmistakably firm. Not aggressive, just final. So Caleb learned. He left a plastic bottle of water by the edge of the concrete, sometimes a sandwich wrapped in paper. Once, when his mother baked too much bread, half a loaf. Caleb never stayed to watch Rex eat. He always turned away quickly, pretending he hadn't noticed the dog at all. Because his mother had told him quietly that some kinds of loyalty deserved respect. In town, rumors moved faster than facts. They said a solar energy company was interested in the land, that the gas station sat on a perfect stretch of open desert, that paperwork had already started moving through the county office. Some people said it was good, progress, jobs. Others said it felt wrong. The gas station had belonged to the Harper family. Everyone remembered that, even if they didn't talk about why it had closed. The father had died suddenly. The daughter had been arrested. The business had been shut down within weeks. No one had gone near it since, except the dog. Rex shifted in his sleep. A sound, distant thunder, maybe rolled across his memory and became something else. For a moment, the desert disappeared. Water surged through streets that had never known rain like that before. Flash floods, sirens, panic. 6 years ago. Rex was younger then, stronger, wearing his black K9 harness with the faded rescue insignia on the side. He had been deployed after a rare desert storm turned dry channels into violent rivers. A car had been swept off the road. Rex remembered the scent first. Fear, gasoline, blood. He remembered swimming against a current that dragged at his legs, his lungs burning, his handler shouting commands through the chaos. He remembered teeth clamped on fabric, the weight of a human body heavier than anything he had ever pulled before. He remembered the moment the woman's head broke the surface, alive. That rescue had made the local news. For a while, people recognized him in town. They knelt to pet him, took photos, called him a hero. Heroes, Rex had learned, were only important until they weren't needed anymore. The memory faded. Rex opened his eyes. The highway was still empty. Time passed differently at Hollow Creek. Morning heat settled in by late hours. The metal awning grew hot to the touch. Lizards skittered along the cracked concrete. Wind carried the smell of dust and distant sage. Rex stood once, slowly, to drink from the bottle Caleb had left. His movement was stiff, deliberate. He drank carefully, then lay back down in the shade. He did not leave the awning. He never did. Because 5 years ago, when the doors of Hollow Creek had been locked for the last time, Rex had been there. He had watched Emily Harper Young then, exhausted, terrified, being led away in handcuffs while strangers searched the diner and the office. He had strained against a chain tied hastily to a railing, barking until his voice broke. He had waited for her to come back that night, then the next, then the next. Eventually, the chain rusted through. Rex stayed anyway. Near dusk, the wind picked up. The sun dropped low, painting the desert in copper and red. Long shadows stretched from the pumps like reaching hands. Rex lifted his head. A truck passed without slowing. Another followed. Then silence. Rex lowered his head back onto his paws, eyes still open, waiting. Because dogs like Rex did not measure time in years, they measured it in faith. And somewhere inside him, deeper than training, deeper than instinct, Rex believed the road would give her back. One day. The day she came back. The Greyhound bus slowed as it crossed the last faded line, marking the edge of Red Hollow, Arizona. Morning heat was already rising from the asphalt, bending the air above the road into a wavering mirror. The sky was a pale, exhausted blue, washed thin by desert light, and the wind carried the smell of dust and old metal. It was just after 6:30 when the bus hissed to a stop beside a cracked curb. No one bothered to repaint anymore. Only one passenger stood. Emily Harper stepped down carefully, as if the ground itself might reject her. She was 33 years old, though prison had given her the posture of someone older. Shoulders held tight, movements measured, eyes that never stopped scanning. She was of average height, slightly built, with narrow shoulders and a frame that looked leaner than it should have been. Her brown hair, once worn loose and long, was now cut just past her jaw, uneven where it had been trimmed without care. Her face held a quiet sharpness, defined cheekbones, a straight nose, lips pressed together by habit rather than anger. Her eyes were gray-blue, steady but guarded, the eyes of someone who had learned not to expect welcome. She carried 2 worn bags, one canvas, one plastic, everything she owned after 5 years behind concrete walls. Inside were one change of clothes, a pair of shoes too thin for desert nights, paperwork stamped and restamped, and exactly $67 folded flat into a prison-issued envelope. No one applauded her return. The driver glanced at her in the mirror, expression neutral but curious, the same look Emily had seen hundreds of times before. The look people gave when they wanted to know what kind of crime fit a face like hers. The doors closed. The bus pulled away. Red Hollow swallowed the sound. Across town, 5 miles away at the edge of the desert, Rex lifted his head. He had been dozing beneath the awning at Hollow Creek Gas and Diner when the wind shifted. It carried something with it, not a sound, not a sight, but a scent buried beneath dust and gasoline and old heat. Rex's amber eyes sharpened. His ears tilted forward. His chest rose as he drew the air in deeper, testing it again. Yes, his body moved before thought could catch up. Rex pushed himself to his feet, stiff but determined. The old injury in his back leg protested, sending a dull ache through his hip, but he ignored it. Pain was familiar. This was different. This was memory. He stepped out from the shade and turned toward the highway. The road shimmered. The town lay quiet. But Rex began to walk. Slow at first, then faster, his limp more pronounced as urgency pulled him forward. His paws struck the asphalt with uneven rhythm, nails clicking, breath steady but growing heavier. 5 years had not dulled the recognition. 5 years had not erased the truth written into his senses. She was back. Emily stood alone on the sidewalk, squinting against the sun, unsure where to go next. The town looked smaller than she remembered. The diner sign on Main Street had changed. The hardware store was gone. A new bank sat where a bakery used to be. Everything felt rearranged, like furniture moved in a house that no longer belonged to her. She adjusted the strap of her bag and took one step forward. Then she heard it, a sound low and rough, half bark, half breath, cutting through the stillness. She turned. The dog was coming toward her from down the road, moving fast despite his age. His coat was dusty, his gait uneven, but there was no hesitation in him. His eyes were locked on her, bright with a certainty Emily had almost forgotten existed. Her breath caught. "No," she whispered, barely audible. "No way." Rex closed the distance in seconds. When he reached her, he did not stop. He surged forward, placing his weight against her legs, his head pressing into her hip, his tail sweeping the air with sudden, clumsy force. A sharp bark broke free, then another, the sound raw with effort and relief. Emily dropped one bag, then the other. She fell to her knees on the cracked pavement, hands trembling as they reached for fur she had only touched in dreams. Rex's face filled her vision. Gray muzzle, familiar scar above his eye, eyes shining wet but focused entirely on her. "Rex," she breathed, her voice breaking on the name. "Oh my God, Rex." He whined softly now, a sound pulled from deep in his chest, and licked her hands with frantic care, as if confirming her shape, her scent, her reality. His body shook with the force of it. He circled her once, then pressed close again, refusing to let her go. People watched from a distance. A few storefront doors paused mid-open. A man pumping gas across the street turned, recognized her, then looked away. No one came closer. No one clapped. No one smiled. Red Hollow did not forgive quickly. Emily didn't notice. She wrapped her arms around Rex's neck and buried her face in his fur, breathing him in. Dust, sun, old leather, home. 5 years of silence collapsed into that moment, and she cried without trying to stop herself. From the far side of the street, a man stood watching. His name was Thomas Reed, though most people called him Tom. He was in his late 50s, tall and narrow-shouldered, with a posture shaped by decades of standing behind counters and beneath car hoods. His hair was iron gray, thinning at the crown, his face lined deeply around the eyes and mouth. Tom had worked at Hollow Creek Gas and Diner once, long ago, alongside Emily's father. He had been there the morning the police came. Tom's hands rested in his pockets now, fingers curled tight. He remembered Emily as a teenager, sweeping floors, arguing with her father about music on the radio. He remembered Rex as a young canine, all muscle and discipline, sitting perfectly still beside her. He also remembered not speaking up. So he stayed where he was, watching from afar, shame settling heavy in his chest. Emily eventually stood, wiping her face with the back of her sleeve. Rex leaned against her leg, solid and warm, as if anchoring her in place. She glanced around. taking in the familiar, unfamiliar faces, the sideways looks, the open suspicion. No one said welcome home. "That's okay," she murmured, more to Rex than to anyone else. "We don't need them." Rex wagged his tail once, slow and deliberate, and turned his head toward the highway again. Then he looked back at her, eyes intent, and took a step in the direction of Hollow Creek. Emily followed. The walk was long. The sun climbed higher. Rex slowed as they went, his limp more obvious now, especially when the road sloped unevenly. Emily noticed the way he favored his back leg, the way he paused too often, the shallow hitch in his breathing. "What happened to you, huh?" she asked softly. Rex didn't answer. He just kept moving. Later, she would learn about the night thieves tried to break into the abandoned station, about the way Rex had thrown himself at them, about the kick that sent him crashing into a concrete curb. For now, she only saw the evidence written into his body. Hollow Creek appeared on the horizon, like a memory refusing to fade. The rusted pumps, the crooked sign, the silence. Emily stopped at the edge of the lot. "This is it," she said quietly. Rex stepped beneath the awning and lay down, exhausted but satisfied, his head resting on his paws. He looked up at her once more, eyes calm now, as if to say, "I did my part." Emily set her bags down and sat beside him on the concrete. For the first time in 5 years, she wasn't alone. The old recorder and the dog who never forgot. By late afternoon, the desert heat had settled deep into the bones of Hollow Creek Gas and Diner. The sun pressed down on the tin roof, and the air inside the building smelled of dust, old grease, and memories that had never learned how to leave. Emily stood just inside the diner doorway, one hand braced against the counter, breathing slowly as if she were stepping into a place that might break if she moved too fast. She had decided to stay, not forever, at least not yet, but long enough to sleep, to think, to figure out what came next. There was nowhere else to go, no money for a motel, no friends eager to offer a couch. Hollow Creek was broken, but it was still hers. Emily rolled up the sleeves of her faded gray shirt and began to clean. She worked methodically, the way prison had taught her to. Clear one space, finish it, move on. She swept glass and sand into careful piles, wiped the counter where her father had once leaned every morning with his coffee, and opened the windows despite the heat to let the stale air move. Sweat darkened her shirt, and her arms ached, but she welcomed the pain. It meant she was doing something real. Rex lay near the back wall at first, watching her with quiet focus. He did not interfere. He had learned long ago when to stay still and when to act. Every so often he shifted his weight, the old injury in his back leg making him grunt softly. When Emily noticed, she frowned. "You're supposed to be resting," she told him gently. Rex's tail thumped once against the floor. He did not move. As the light began to soften, Emily stepped outside to clear the area behind the station. The storage yard had been left untouched for years, weeds growing tall along the fence line, sand piled against the concrete pad where the underground fuel tanks were buried. She dragged aside broken crates and rusted scrap, coughing as dust rose into the air. That was when Rex stood. He moved with purpose now, ignoring the ache in his leg, crossing the yard to a spot near the largest fuel tank. He lowered his head and sniffed the ground, circling once, then twice. His body stiffened. A low sound rumbled in his chest. Not a bark, not a growl, but something older, something alert. "Rex?" Emily called. He began to dig. The dirt was hard-packed, dry from years without rain, but Rex worked at it with quiet determination. His paws moved fast, despite his age, scraping sand and gravel aside. Emily hurried over, kneeling beside him, brushing hair from her face. "What is it?" she asked, her voice instinctively hushed. Rex dug until metal scraped against claw. Emily froze. Together, they uncovered the corner of a small, rectangular metal box, rusted but intact, buried just beneath the surface. Emily recognized it instantly. Her father had owned dozens like it, used for tools, spare parts, things he didn't want left inside the diner. She lifted it carefully. It was heavier than it looked. "Did you know this was here?" she murmured. Rex sat back on his haunches, breathing hard, eyes fixed on the box as if it were something alive. Emily carried it inside and set it on the counter. The latch resisted at first, then gave with a sharp snap. Inside lay a jumble of objects wrapped in oil-stained cloth, an old analog tape recorder, compact and scratched, the kind journalists and technicians used before everything went digital. a small memory card sealed in plastic, and a spiral notebook, its cover warped but intact. Her father's handwriting stared back at her from the first page. Emily's throat tightened. She sat heavily on a stool and opened the notebook. The writing was neat, precise, filled with diagrams, dates, and technical notes. She skimmed at first, then slowed as certain words caught her eye. Signal routing, relay access, unauthorized taps, call loops. Her father had been careful, always careful, but there was urgency here, lines underlined twice, margins crowded with questions. He had suspected something. Emily reached for the recorder with trembling hands. She checked the batteries, dead, of course. But after a moment of searching, she found replacements in a drawer beneath the counter, still sealed in plastic. Some habits, it seemed, ran deep. The machine whirred to life. The first recording crackled with static. Her father's voice emerged slowly, older than she remembered, tired but steady. Emily leaned closer. Rex rose the instant the sound filled the room. His body went rigid, ears pinned forward, lips pulling back just enough to show teeth. A deep growl rolled out of him, echoing against the diner walls. He stepped between Emily and the recorder, hackles raised, eyes fixed on the machine with unmistakable hostility. "Rex, hey," Emily said, startled. "It's okay." But Rex did not relax. The voice on the tape shifted. Another man now, low and distorted, words blurred by interference. Rex lunged forward, barking once, sharp and furious, snapping at the air as if someone stood there in front of him. Emily shut the recorder off. Silence fell heavy and abrupt. Rex stood panting, muscles taut, eyes still locked on the dead machine. It took a full minute before his body eased, before he stepped back and sat down, chest heaving. Emily stared at him, shaken. "You remember," she whispered. Rex did not look at her. He looked past her, through the walls, through time. The memory came unbidden. Night, flashing lights, men shouting. Emily being forced to the ground beside the diner while officers tore through the office. Rex straining against a chain hastily wrapped around a fence post, barking until his throat went raw. A stranger's boot connecting with his side when he lunged too close. Pain, confusion, the smell of fear everywhere. Emily swallowed hard. Someone had been here before the police, someone Rex had recognized, someone whose voice was now trapped on that tape. Outside, across the road, a vehicle idled. The man inside watched the gas station through binoculars, his face obscured by the angle of the windshield and the brim of a low hat. He was in his early 40s, broad-shouldered, with the compact build of someone who worked physical jobs when needed. His name was Mark Ellison, though Emily did not know it yet. He had sharp eyes and a habit of chewing at the inside of his cheek when he was thinking. Mark had been watching Hollow Creek since morning. He had recognized Emily the moment she stepped off the bus. Recognized Rex, too. That hadn't surprised him. What surprised him was the digging. He lowered the binoculars and made a call, his voice low and controlled. "She's back," he said, and the dog found something. Inside the diner, Emily packed the recorder, notebook, and memory card back into the box and slid it beneath the counter. Her pulse still raced. Whatever her father had discovered, it hadn't been small, and someone out there still cared enough to watch. Rex lay down at her feet, alert but calm again, his head resting against her boot. Emily placed a hand on his neck, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. "We'll go slow," she said softly. "I promise." Rex closed his eyes, but one ear stayed lifted, listening. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the rusted pumps. Somewhere beyond the fence line, Mark Ellison started his engine and drove away without headlights. Hollow Creek was no longer forgotten. What was buried was never just fuel. The night air over Hollow Creek cooled quickly, carrying with it the faint hum of insects and the distant echo of trucks moving along the highway. Inside the diner, a single lamp cast a warm circle of light across the counter where Emily sat, the metal box open in front of her. Rex lay nearby, awake but still, his chin resting on his paws, one eye half open, as if sleep were something he allowed, not something that claimed him. Emily spread her father's notebook across the counter and began to read more carefully. This time, she didn't skim. Page after page revealed diagrams of cable routes, signal relays, and junction points. Her father had always been meticulous, but here his handwriting tightened, angles sharper, pressure heavier. Certain locations were circled repeatedly, one of them labeled simply HC7 Junction. Emily frowned. She pulled out her phone and searched through old county infrastructure maps. It took time, spotty signal, outdated files, but eventually the overlay appeared. When she aligned the map with her father's notes, her stomach dropped. Hollow Creek wasn't just a gas station. It sat directly above a major underground fiber-optic trunk line, a backbone cable running parallel to the interstate, feeding data traffic between Phoenix and several border hubs. One of its oldest access points, decommissioned on paper but never fully dismantled, was marked less than 30 yards behind the diner. Emily leaned back slowly, the weight of the realization pressing into her chest. "That's why," she whispered. "That's why they wanted this place." Her father hadn't been paranoid. He had been careful, and someone had noticed. The recorder clicked softly as she rewound another tape and pressed play again, this time lowering the volume. Her father's voice came through, tense but controlled, describing unauthorized call routing, encrypted packets moving through private relay channels, money being shifted in patterns too clean to be coincidence. Then another voice appeared, sharper now, clearer than before, issuing warnings disguised as friendly advice. The name of the company came up only once, almost casually. Southwest Meridian Logistics. Emily froze. The company was one of the largest employers in Red Hollow. Warehouses, trucking yards, distribution contracts that stretched across state lines. Everyone knew the logo. Everyone trusted the name. Her father had suspected them of using the cable access beneath Hollow Creek to route illicit communications tied to a money laundering operation, piggybacking on legitimate shipping data to hide financial transfers. When he refused to sell the land, refused to stop asking questions, they had silenced him the only way they knew how, by removing her. Emily closed her eyes, breathing slowly, forcing the anger down into something usable. Rage wouldn't help. Truth might. A knock sounded at the diner door. Rex was on his feet instantly, a low warning rumbling in his chest. "Easy," Emily murmured, standing. She moved to the door and opened it just enough to see who stood outside. The man waiting there was tall, broad through the shoulders, his posture relaxed but alert. He was in his early 50s, with close-cropped salt-and-pepper hair and a face weathered by sun and stress rather than age. His eyes were sharp, watchful, the kind that missed very little. He wore plain clothes, jeans, a faded jacket, but there was something unmistakably official about the way he carried himself. "My name's Daniel Foster," he said quietly. "I used to be a cop. I trained your dog." Rex stepped forward, sniffed once, then wagged his tail. Slow, controlled, unmistakable recognition. Emily's breath caught. You're Dan?" Foster nodded. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "He was the best trainee I ever had. Smart, stubborn, took commands like he understood why they mattered." Rex huffed softly, as if agreeing. Foster's expression shifted as he looked past Emily into the diner, taking in the mess, the box on the counter, the tension hanging in the air. "I heard you were back," he said. "Heard you were asking questions." Emily hesitated only a moment before stepping aside. "Then you should come in." Foster removed his jacket and draped it over a chair, his movements careful, respectful. Up close, Emily could see the old scar along his jaw, pale against tanned skin. She wondered briefly what had put it there, what it had taken from him. Something had. People like him didn't leave the force without a reason. He listened as Emily explained what she had found, his eyes narrowing as the pieces came together. When she mentioned Southwest Meridian Logistics, his jaw tightened. "I thought so," he said quietly. He told her then about the complaints that never went anywhere, the investigations quietly shut down, the internal pressure that had followed, about the night he'd been told to stop asking questions, or find another job. He had chosen the latter. "They needed the land," Foster said, "and they needed your father quiet. When that didn't work, they needed someone else to take the fall." Emily's hands clenched into fists. "Me," Foster nodded. "You were convenient, connected, alone." Rex whined softly at her side. Foster stood and walked toward the back of the diner, pausing near the door that led outside. "Show me what he marked." Emily led him around the building, flashlight in hand. The yard behind Hollow Creek was quiet, the desert stretching wide and dark beyond the fence. Rex moved ahead of them, purposeful now, nose low, tail steady. He crossed the sand directly to a patch of ground Emily hadn't noticed before. Slightly raised, the earth packed differently. Rex stopped and barked once, sharp and precise. "There," Foster said softly. "That's an old access hatch." Together, they cleared away dirt and debris until the outline of a sealed technical hatch emerged, its edges worn but intact. It had been painted over years ago, disguised as part of the concrete pad. Emily stared down at it, heart pounding. He knew. "Yes," Foster said, "and so did they." From across town, another man watched events unfold with growing unease. Harold Vance sat alone in his small living room, curtains drawn tight despite the heat. He was in his late 60s, thin to the point of fragility, his shoulders hunched as if bracing against a blow that never quite came. Once, he had worked as a junior accountant for Southwest Meridian Logistics. Once, he had signed papers he hadn't fully understood. He had seen Emily Harper on the news that morning. Now, hearing that she was back, that the old station lights were on again, his hands began to shake. He poured himself a drink he didn't want and didn't finish. The phone rang twice before he unplugged it. Silence felt safer. Back at Hollow Creek, Emily and Foster stood quietly, the enormity of what lay beneath their feet settling in. Rex sat between them, alert, watchful, his body angled protectively toward Emily. "They framed you," Foster said finally, "for the land, for the access, to erase the evidence." Emily nodded, a strange calm settling over her. "Then they made a mistake," Foster met her gaze. "They underestimated how much a dog remembers." Rex's ears perked. The wind swept across the yard, rattling the old fence, carrying the distant sound of engines, and the unspoken promise that what had been buried was no longer hidden. Hollow Creek was quiet again, but it was no longer silent. The second trial. The courthouse in Red Hollow had not been this full in years. By mid-morning, camera vans lined the street, cables snaking across the sidewalk like roots. The desert sun glinted off windshields and lenses, and reporters spoke in practiced whispers, as if noise itself might disturb what was finally unfolding. Inside, the air was cool and dry, heavy with the smell of paper, old wood, and the faint electricity of attention. For the first time since Emily Harper's arrest 5 years earlier, the town was looking straight at what it had tried not to see. Emily sat at the defense table, spine straight, hands folded, her face composed in the careful way she had learned to hold herself when every glance felt like a judgment. She wore a simple dark jacket, borrowed from a neighbor who had not spoken to her since the trial, until yesterday. Her hair was pulled back neatly, exposing the pale line at her jaw where stress always settled. She did not look at the cameras. She did not look at the people she recognized from her past. She kept her eyes on the judge's bench and breathed. At her feet lay Rex. He was calm but visibly tired, his chest rising a little faster than usual, his back leg tucked close to spare its strain. A soft service vest rested across his shoulders, not the rigid canine harness of his working years, but something gentler, meant to signal presence rather than authority. His muzzle was grayer than it had been even weeks ago, the silver stark beneath the courtroom lights. He rested his chin on Emily's shoe and did not move. Across the aisle, the prosecution table was occupied by representatives who did not belong to Red Hollow. Their suits were tailored, their expressions composed. They represented Southwest Meridian Logistics. Though the company's name had been carefully avoided in early filings, it could not be avoided anymore. The evidence had changed everything. Over the past 2 weeks, forensic technicians from the state had recovered and authenticated data from the analog recorder, the memory card, and the cable access logs beneath Hollow Creek. The recordings were no longer whispers and static. Cleaned and time-stamped, they documented unauthorized routing through the underground fiber line, coded conversations tied to shell accounts, and pressure applied to a man who refused to sell his land, Emily's father. When the first audio clip played, the room went still. His voice carried through the speakers, older, steadier than Emily remembered, but unmistakably his. He spoke about anomalies, about numbers that didn't reconcile, about the risks of letting this continue. Then another voice answered him, smoother, confident, dismissive. A warning framed as advice. Rex lifted his head at the sound. A low sound rose from his chest, not loud, but firm enough to ripple across the room. Heads turned. The judge glanced down, eyebrow raised, then nodded once to the bailiff, who gave a subtle signal to continue. The next exhibit was video, The footage came from an old security camera across the road from Hollow Creek, discovered in the archives of a closed auto shop. It was grainy, colorless, and dated from the night Emily had been arrested. The timestamp flickered at the bottom of the screen. The angle was poor, but the movement was clear enough. A figure crossed the lot behind the station hours before police arrived. Rex appeared on screen next, younger, faster, pulling hard against a chain. His body language changed the instant the figure approached. Ears forward, posture aggressive, barking sharp and continuous. The intruder hesitated, then lashed out. The kick was clumsy but violent. Rex went down, then surged back up, refusing to retreat. The courtroom breathed in as one. Emily's fingers tightened together. She had never seen this footage. She had only heard fragments, rumors dismissed as noise. On the stand, Daniel Foster testified calmly. He described Rex's training, the specificity of canine threat response, the difference between agitation and recognition. Foster was tall and solid in a plain suit, his hair more gray than black now, his voice even. He explained how Rex's reaction on the tape aligned with prior encounters, how dogs remembered voices and scents long after faces faded. This animal, Foster said, nodding toward Rex, reacted to that intruder the same way he reacted when the same voice appeared on the recovered recording. That's not coincidence, that's conditioning. The prosecution objected. The judge overruled. Outside, the press adjusted their headlines. Inside, the case tipped. When the state announced the opening of a formal investigation into Southwest Meridian logistics, citing evidence of financial crimes, illegal data routing, and witness intimidation, the reaction was immediate. Murmurs spread. Pens scratched faster. One of the company's attorneys leaned close to another, whispering urgently. By afternoon, the judge ruled on the property claim. The land beneath Hollow Creek, long contested and quietly encumbered, was formally recognized as belonging to the Harper family, free of liens imposed during Emily's incarceration. The gavel struck once, clean and final. Emily closed her eyes. Rex exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that left him sagging slightly against her leg. His tail moved once, weak but certain. The day stretched on with procedural details, statements for the record, dates set for hearings yet to come. Emily answered when spoken to. She did not speak otherwise. When the court recessed, the room erupted into motion. Reporters pressing forward, deputies forming a loose barrier, voices calling her name. Emily stood slowly. Rex tried to rise and stumbled. She knelt immediately, one hand steadying his chest, the other smoothing the fur along his neck. "Easy," she whispered, close enough that only he could hear. "We're done." Daniel Foster approached, concern etched into his face. "He needs rest," he said quietly. "That was a lot for him." "I know," Emily replied. Her voice was steady, but her eyes shone. He held on. They moved through a side exit to avoid the press. Outside, the desert air felt heavier than it had that morning, heat pressing down with familiar insistence. A small crowd had gathered across the street, some curious, some supportive, some unsure. Cameras flashed. Someone called out congratulations. Someone else said nothing at all. Emily ignored it. She guided Rex to the car Daniel had arranged, easing him into the back seat with practiced care. Rex lay down at once, sides heaving, eyes half closed. His body trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion. The adrenaline had carried him through the courtroom. Now it left him empty. As they drove away, the courthouse shrank in the rearview mirror. The town did not cheer, it watched. Back at Hollow Creek, Emily laid Rex on a blanket beneath the awning. The light was softer here, the wind gentler. She knelt beside him, offering water, stroking his fur until his breathing slowed. His eyes opened briefly, met hers, then closed again. "Good boy," she said, her voice breaking at last. "You did good." The station was hers again. The truth was no longer buried, but the cost lay breathing quietly at her feet. Inside the diner, the phone rang once and stopped. Emily didn't move to answer it. She stayed where she was, counting Rex's breaths, letting the day end exactly where it needed to, where waiting finally met its answer. Spring came slowly to Red Hollow, as it always did. The desert never rushed anything, not forgiveness, not growth, not healing. Pale green pushed through sand where nothing had lived for years, and the mornings carried a softer light, less harsh, less accusatory. From the porch of Hollow Creek, Emily watched the day begin with a mug of coffee, warming her hands, and a familiar weight resting against her legs. Rex slept with his head on her knee. He was thinner now. The powerful chest that once pulled drowning strangers from floodwater rose more slowly, each breath measured. His muzzle had gone almost completely white, and his eyes, though still sharp when open, spent more time closed. Age had finally caught him, gently but without mercy. Emily adjusted the blanket around him and looked out across the lot. The pumps were gone. In their place stood raised wooden planters, filled with soil dark enough to promise life. A hand-painted sign hung above the old diner door now, fresh wood still smelling of sap. Rex's corner, he waited. The letters were uneven, carved by Daniel Foster's hands, careful but unpolished, the way things mattered more when they weren't perfect. Emily had been declared fully innocent 3 weeks earlier. The final ruling came down in a quiet courtroom far from television cameras. All charges vacated, her record cleared. A formal apology entered into the record. Compensation awarded. Not nearly enough to buy back 5 years, but enough to give her a future that belonged to her again. She had listened without crying. She had saved that for later. Southwest Meridian Logistics was still under investigation, its executives tangled in hearings and indictments that stretched beyond Red Hollow. Emily had testified once more, steady and precise, then stepped away. Justice, she had learned, did not require her to watch every door close. The land offers came quickly after that. Solar companies, developers, investors who spoke in smooth voices about opportunity and fresh starts. They offered numbers that made people in town gasp, numbers that could have erased every hard memory with distance and comfort. Emily said no. Instead, she rebuilt Hollow Creek into something smaller, quieter, truer. The diner reopened with only a few tables and a pot of coffee always on. The back rooms were converted into resting spaces, clean, cool, simple, designed for retired canine dogs, animals who had served and been forgotten, whose bodies bore the cost of loyalty long after usefulness had faded. She called it a rest stop, not a shelter. Words mattered. The town noticed. At first, they watched from a distance, unsure how to approach a place that reminded them of what they hadn't done. Then one morning, an older woman, Emily barely recognized, stopped by with a loaf of bread and an apology spoken too late, but still real. A man who had crossed the street to avoid her now fixed a broken step without being asked. No one made speeches, they just stayed. Caleb Moore arrived one afternoon with his bicycle, leaned awkwardly against the fence, and his hands stuffed into his pockets. He was taller now, voice deeper, eyes still cautious but curious. He looked at Rex, sleeping peacefully in the shade, then at Emily. "I heard you needed help," he said. Emily smiled. "We always do." Caleb became the first official volunteer, showing up after school to refill water bowls, sweep floors, and sit quietly with dogs who no longer trusted loud voices. He had a gift for patience, learned from years of leaving food without expecting thanks. Word spread beyond Red Hollow. Articles followed, then programs. A state-funded initiative expanded from Emily's model, providing medical support and adoption networks for aging canines across Arizona. Dogs came in pairs sometimes, handlers beside them, hands resting on scarred heads, saying goodbye with gratitude instead of abandonment. Emily greeted them all. Rex watched from his place on the porch, eyes half-lidded, tail giving a slow thump whenever a new arrival passed. He no longer stood to inspect them. He no longer needed to. His work was done. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the desert in amber and gold, Rex struggled to lift his head. Emily noticed immediately. She set aside the ledger she'd been balancing and knelt beside him, her heart tightening in recognition she could not deny. "It's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was trying to convince. She sat on the porch, pulling him gently closer until his head rested fully on her lap. His breathing was shallow now, but unlabored, each breath deliberate, as if chosen. "You waited," she said softly, fingers threading through the familiar fur. "You waited for me." Rex opened his eyes. They were calm, complete. His tail moved once, barely stirring the dust. The town was quiet. Caleb stood near the gate, instinctively still. Daniel Foster watched from a respectful distance, his hat in his hands. No one spoke. Some endings did not belong to words. Rex exhaled, and did not inhale again. Emily stayed where she was, hands steady, tears falling silently onto the blanket. She did not call for help. There was nothing to fix, only something to honor. They buried Rex beneath the awning where he had waited all those years, a small stone marking the place with his name and the dates that mattered. The sign above the door stayed exactly where it was. Life continued, not loudly, not quickly, but honestly. Hollow Creek became what it was always meant to be, a place of rest, of return, of second chances given without conditions. Travelers stopped for coffee. Retired dogs slept in the shade. People learned to look each other in the eye again. Sometimes, when the road was quiet and the wind just right, Emily thought she heard the familiar sound of paws on concrete. She smiled. Waiting, she had learned, was not empty. Sometimes, it was love holding the door open. At the end of this story, the lesson is simple, and it's one we often forget in our daily lives. Truth does not always arrive quickly. Justice does not always come on time. But that does not mean waiting is wasted. Rex waited not because he was told to, and not because he expected a reward. He waited because loyalty was who he was. And Emily survived not because life was fair, but because she did not let bitterness decide who she became. In our own lives, we all carry places where something was taken from us. A reputation, a relationship, a season of life we can never get back. And sometimes, the world moves on before we are ready, before the truth is heard. This story reminds us that quiet faith still matters, that doing the right thing in silence still counts, that kindness given when no one is watching can change the ending of a life. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who may need hope today. Tell us in the comments what this story meant to you, or where you are watching from. And if you believe that loyalty, compassion, and truth still have a place in this world, please subscribe to the channel and walk with us through more stories like this. May God bless you, protect you, and give you strength in the seasons when waiting feels heavy. And if you believe, write Amen in the comments. Thank you for being here.